Hello, I'm Simon Acombe, and this is my second audiogram on the changing of the guard. I'm sorry this is a bit late, other work intervened over the last week. So it's been a really fascinating discussion here on Twitter since I began posting some of these materials about the book. And two areas have really come up. So I began posting some stuff relating to the beginning of the changing of the guard, but I also took a bit of a detour to do a thread about the court-martial of the Major General who was caught defrauding the school fees allowance. And again, strong feelings on part of that. So in the two areas I was looking at, I put up some stuff relating to the beginning of the book, which is about training exercise at Battus, the big training area in Canada where the army does armoured warfare. And I'd like to keep this discussion kind of accessible to people who don't have any military background. But an interesting thing that did come up in some of the feedback on here was about this idea of free play versus scripted exercises. I suggested in the Changing of the Guard that by around 2001, Battus had become quite choreographed, quite formalised, and that because it was very career significant, people were wary of innovating. There was some pushback on that, which was interesting, but also some agreement. But I think this really interesting idea is about this notion of free play and exercises. So my impression as an outsider is that the technology essentially exists these days with lasers to fairly realistically simulate combat, and that it is possible to set up exercises that are in effect non-scripted, that it's who wins. But it also seems that there is a reluctance to do that, which in some ways is understandable because you wouldn't necessarily get the training benefit at the lower levels you'd expect, but also because it's unpredictable, and that is a frightening thing. And an interesting area that I don't know too much about is to what extent the big post-Vietnam innovations that the US made with their training areas in the US and the implications or the introduction of laser technology, to what extent that was free play or not. So I'd be interested to hear more on that. Then the second area I looked at was the Major General's court-martial, and I did this big thread about accountability in this sort of surreal situation that now exists whereby you can lose your job as a senior officer in the British military for fiddling your school fees or for misusing your official car, but there's still not really any accountability for operational performance. And I explained how that came to be and why that takes place. As I did in the book, often I tried to get this question of why rather than what. Again, interesting to see the feedback on that. Clearly, a range of views on CEA, some people very strongly in favour of it. I suppose my feeling on this is that I think having allowances or perks as part of a job, it's just dangerous, I think. I can understand why it's done, but if it creates such a huge potential real world boost to a salary, then, it is a system that is open to exploitation. And it is this idea as well I looked at in the book of the kind of role of rule breaking in the army. The idea that in an authoritarian institution, there are reasons for it to be authoritarian, but because that's an impossible way to live on a day-to-day basis, there has to be a parallel system of breaking rules as well as making rules. And I think that is a really big factor in CEA, that this was a kind of legitimate infraction. And it has been suggested to me as well that what he did was much more widespread than, just him. Anyway, I'm going to take a few other kind of detours with taking this forward before going back into the chronological march through the book, just because a couple of excerpts and related pieces have now run. So I had a big excerpt from the Changing of the Guard in GQ last month about Alexander Blackman and Marine A. That is now online, so I'm going to post that and also go through some of my thinking on that and what I really pushed in the book that had not been in the conversation with us so far. And I also had a piece in Spears magazine about leadership in the British Army, which I tried to keep quite broad brush, but also looking at how military leadership relates to leadership in the civilian world. So I'll be putting those pieces up and also sharing some thoughts on them more generally. But really enjoyed this so far. And as before, happy to engage with all comers and look forward to hearing feedback. All right, bye.